Okay, we're live again, and today we're going to be talking about F sharp again. Look, all this is I'm just coming in each day and taking you along for the ride as I do my ear training. So today I'm not going to hook up the keyboard, the electronic keyboard. I just want to use a regular old keyboard. So I'm not sure of the sound quality, but hopefully you'll still be able to hear this pretty clearly. And you can always do these exercises on your own. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going through the exercises I would do on my own. And so sometimes from day to day, not much will change. I'm going to do very similar exercises because the idea here is I'm trying to gain familiarity with these notes. Right now we're dealing with B flat, C, D, E, and F sharp. Now, I haven't really done anything today in terms of ear training, but I did put together a playlist today for baby ear training with a bunch of songs that help to reinforce the concept of E major. So I may have an E in my mind. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try and hear an F sharp because it's actually pretty easy for me to hear a C now. And I'm wondering why that is. I don't exactly know, but I pretty much have gotten the C every time I've come in. The F sharp, though, even though I have a pretty clear idea of what it sounds like, I don't really know how to reproduce it in my mind without any external reference pitch. So I'm going to sit here, and what I'm doing, I'm going to be quiet for a moment, but I am just searching for what feels like F sharp. And right away, I felt some vocal tension. I was using my vocal cords to try and figure out where F sharp feels in my throat and my mouth. And I really think that's what makes perfect pitch slow. If you learn as a kid, you just learn it. You learn it like those trees are green, there's some red and orange out there. You just know. You don't have to be taught it. I mean, you have to be taught the labels, but you don't have to be taught that these are different colors. And with perfect pitch, the idea is that over time, you actually start to lose your ability to recognize the differences between these tones because you don't use it, so you lose it, right? And as adults, we hear all these things. Okay, I'm going to make my E major playlist so that I can learn what E sounds like by this one song. I'm going to use this song that has a real prominent E, or I'm going to use this playlist that has a C. And somebody actually asked me to talk about Rick Beato's video. I've seen some of his videos. I really like Rick Beato, actually. I think he's great. But I need to watch that video again, and I'm going to talk about it. But I know that one of the things that he has recommended, and a lot of people have recommended this, is to try and find a song, one that you can easily recall. I know some people use Star Wars for a particular pitch. I know that some people will try and create entire playlists to get the feel for E. But I don't really think that, I think that can work. I think if you learn it very early on in your life, I think it can have a strong emotional response and you can learn it. But I don't think that's how people with native perfect pitch learn. They're not sitting here thinking, okay, I'm going to think of a song so I can get close to the pitch. And I mean, if that's a skill that you develop, just my personal opinion, how useful is that? That if you can recall a song in the middle of a performance, well, there's all these other notes going on, you've got all these other harmonies, different instruments, but you can remember a piece that starts with E major, and therefore you can identify the violin one is playing in E. How useful is that? It's much more useful, I think, if you don't have native perfect pitch, to be able to go in and just be like, okay, the violin just played a second inversion triad, and it's outside of the key. So I knew it was a a half step away from the tonic. So we're out of the key now. So I think relative pitch is a much more beneficial use of your time. But I will look at the Rick Beato video. I'm actually kind of curious, and I'll respond to it. I'll just let you know what I think. I know he was a professor as well. I taught for a long time. My final position was a visiting assistant professor, and typically that designation is used for when a university needs some type of expertise outside of what they currently have, but they don't want to make it a permanent position. So they give you a visiting assistant professor role, and you typically still work for a different university. So that's kind of how I ended. And when the contract was only supposed to be for one semester, it ended up going for 2 years. I taught there for 8 years, but when they didn't offer to renew the contract, I just said, okay. So I've kind of learned and exhausted my options here. I'm going to go out and do something else. And so that's why you have all this other stuff. And I'm rambling a little bit today, but maybe that's part of my process. Maybe that's how I actually start my ear training, because the truth is I come in here, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I create a little thumbnail, I post something on there, but it may or may not have anything to do with what actually goes on. So if you're here live, you can go and you can chat with me during this. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and play some notes. I'm going to try and hear that F sharp. Going back to my previous point before I got sidetracked, I was trying to use my throat to identify F sharp. And so I just don't think that's going to result in anything worth using. Maybe if you're stuck in the middle of nowhere and you're a composer and you want to write a piece and you want to hear and you want to know what note is in your mind, that could be really useful so that you can always kind of orchestrate it with the same octave registers. Other than that, I don't know how quasi-perfect pitch is that great, although it could help you get more information within relative pitch. So if you're dealing with chordal harmony, you hear a bunch of force, something like this. Your traditional relative pitch won't train that, but if you train your interval training to a really high level, you instantly recognize force, well, then you'll recognize there's a bunch of force there. And maybe if you have one note that just pops out at you because you have some amount of tonal awareness, that's kind of what I'm calling this. Maybe you hear the B flat, then it can help you figure out the other pitches. But it's a slower process than what people that actually have perfect pitch are able to do. And at that point, what is it? Maybe it's a party trick. Maybe you have some use for it. I'm sure there's plenty of uses for quasi-perfect pitch. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try again, because I was cheating. I was using my throat, and I'm going to just think about the pitch. I'm thinking about the F sharp. You can do this too. And again, I'm going back to my C. I have the C so clearly in my mind now that I keep going back to it. Okay, so I'm going to play the F sharp now, see if I got it right. Although I should, because I just played all those notes. Okay, so I did get it right, but no surprise because I just played C, F, B flat, E flat, chordal harmony. So the F is only a half step away. Now what I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to play these notes, and I'm going to try and listen into them. And I'm just going to try and recognize the difference between these notes. Now, this I think is useful. This I do in the Flawless Ear Training course, which is free right now, by the way, units 1 to 3. I actually had unit 4 available yesterday for a little while, but it was only supposed to be units 1 to 3. And this is useful for relative pitch because it's one of those drills that'll open up your ear. So actually, before I get into this, I just want to say one more thing. If you've been going along with a Flawless course and you're getting stuck on a particular lesson, or you're trying to follow that work 3 days before you go on to the next one, you really don't have to do that. If you're seeing progress by doing one lesson a day, you can do that. The reason I say 3 days is because I don't know your skill level. I don't know what you're struggling with. And so I usually tell people, hey, if you can't get 100%, come back for 2 more days. So you do it for 3 days in a row. And 3 days in a row is important. You want to have that consistent time. And I figure that that will be useful for most people, because if I were to do the same exact lesson in the university 3 days in a row, the first day, most of the students would be able to hear something by the end of it. The second day, if I played it again, they'd hear even more. By the third day, I'd have a pretty high percentage of students being able to pass that drill. I've experimented with this. It's just like 3 days is a good number. But that's not how the course was designed. And you can ignore a lot of my grading instructions. Those are tips, and I don't think I did a good enough job explaining that. It's a one part of the course that bothers me, and eventually I have to go through, edit all that stuff out, and just explain what I'm trying to explain right now in a more clear way. But all you have to do is one lesson a day. But the trick here is how you do one lesson a day. You have to come in on consecutive days. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You know, it has to be consecutive days, and I want you to try and do it at least 4 days a week. If you can do that, you can do 4 lessons a week, and you can take some time off for the weekend. Some time off is not going to hurt you, you know. It might actually help. But the key here is you've got to have those consecutive days, and then the lessons will build and reinforce each other, and so you don't actually have to spend 3 days if you feel like you're getting decent results from each lesson. Like if you come in on lesson 1 and then on day 2 you go to lesson 2, and lesson 2 feels challenging but not absolutely impossible, then you can go on to lesson 3. And where you get stopped is on the final exam. So you can literally, there's a lot of lessons for the first unit. It's basically a little over a month of lessons for the first unit. When you get to that final exam, if you can't pass the final exam, then that indicates to you you have to go back and work on any of the lessons, which could be all of them, that you had trouble with. And then you can go ahead and spend 3 days on each lesson. But every now and then try that final exam again. And once you can pass that final exam, then you move on to the next unit. Because here's the thing about this course. It's very difficult to explain, but it's actually very simple, right? The idea here is that there are a lot of exercises in each lesson, but you don't have to get a perfect score. You don't even have to be able to do every single aspect of each lesson. What you have to be able to do is the content in the final exam. If you understand that, you're ready for level 2 or level 3, right? So the idea here is that you really don't have to worry too much about your progress, but if you can't find pass the final, go back and retake some of the lessons that were more difficult for you. All right, let's do some perfect pitch training. So I'm going to start by just closing my eyes and listening to these notes. I've got my fingers on the keys, so I'll play the right ones. Just listening for that subtle difference. Great for relative pitch training. Lower notes B flat, they're all a major second away. So it's B flat, C, D, E, F sharp. Okay, I had a moment, so I'm able to sort of recognize these individual pitches. Don't try and overthink this. Just if you recognize a B flat when I play a B flat, that's, I think, great. So I'm just going to randomly play one of these pitches. It'll be a little easier for me because I know where my fingers are, but try and identify the pitch by its quality. B flat. E. D. C. F sharp, D, C, E, F sharp. Now I'm going to compare them at different octaves. It's a B flat. It's funny, C is starting to feel like home to me. I always thought it was boring, but now it's comfortable. What note are we on? D. I really do hear a brightness on E. There's just something bright about it. And F sharp. Then I'm going to talk about something. So much energy in F sharp. Okay, so somebody said something that I thought was kind of interesting, and I think it's a common misconception. Somebody said, well, we recognize C as having a certain color because songs that are in C have a certain mood, or you'll hear this saying, D is the saddest key. And then you'll learn at some point that actually pitch has changed over time. We only recently actually established guidelines for A440. So pitch could have changed over time. And so this idea that a composer 400 years ago wrote in D minor because it's sad, you may think that that's not actually true because that composer was using different pitches. But what you have to realize is that military bands are actually a newer thing, and equal temperament is kind of a newer thing. But when we had orchestras, the violins and woodwind instruments, when you play in particular keys, if I tune a violin down a half step, D minor, even though it's actually going to be C sharp, will still kind of have that quality of D minor, and it's because of the makeup of the instrument. So if you play something on the E string of a violin, it's going to sound bright. If you play something on the G string, it's going to sound darker because that's the lowest string. So even though pitch has changed over time, the characteristics of the instruments haven't really changed. We're still tuning in fifths, we're still tuning to the instrument itself and then to the orchestra itself. So even though D minor, C major may have changed over time, the pitch may have shifted, the qualities that the instruments produce are still there. And I don't think that that's the quality we're listening for with perfect pitch. I don't think we're listening for the sadness that's evoked from D minor because of the tuning of the violin. or the strings, or the woodwinds, or the brass. For example, if you're a trumpet player and you're playing in C sharp, you're using 1, 2, and 3, 2 and 3, you're using a lot of valves, okay? And the more valves you use, the more stuffy the sound can become. Whereas if you play in B flat, you're using a lot of open valves, and that's going to give you a brighter, clearer sound. So B flat tends to sound pretty clear on a brass instrument if you're talking B flat concert. And C sharp, the actual key of C sharp, written C sharp for a trumpet, is going to sound a little bit more muted, a little bit more angsty almost, okay? So the nature of the instrument can also produce a particular tone color. And that is why I like using the piano for perfect pitch training, because if I'm going to go to my euphonium, that's the instrument I play, it's like a small tuba. If I go to the euphonium, right, then I play in the key of B flat or whatever key I'm playing in. I tend to know what notes I'm actually playing. This is what a euphonium looks like, by the way. It's like a small tuba. So I know what the actual notes sound like on a euphonium. If I hear a euphonium recording, I'm like, that's a B flat, that's an E flat. Because I've played it so much, I know the idiosyncrasies of the instrument. And so a lot of perfect pitch programs will say learn on your instrument first. Because what you can do then is you can actually make a pretty accurate aural recall because you've played that instrument so much. But I still don't think that's perfect pitch. I don't think that, I mean, that's a great party trick because you'll basically be able to pose as somebody with perfect pitch and probably identify a lot of notes. If somebody just goes to a piano and you can relate it to your instrument, you'll be able to identify a lot of the pitches. But that's not actually perfect pitch training, in my opinion. That is learning the characteristics of a particular instrument, memorizing it. And you're able to memorize it because you practice this instrument every day. So I do think that that can lead to opening up your ear, where if I play the euphonium, I can start to identify those pitches. Then over time, I have more information to be able to assess the notes on the piano or another instrument. Perfect example. If I play a C on the piano, or if I try and hear a C in my mind, 9 times out of 10, except recently since I've been doing the perfect pitch training, 9 times out of 10, I will actually sing a B flat. Because C, a written C in the treble clef, is actually going to be a B flat on the piano. It's going to sound as a B flat. So that transposition can mess things up. So if you're off by a certain interval every time, go check your instrument. What's this transposition? Is there something going on there? And so what I think we're actually listening for, as I'm coming to kind of the end of this training publicly, I think we're actually listening for something much more subtle than a mood. I know that people with perfect pitch develop associations, but here's the thing about that. And just because somebody says they develop an association doesn't mean that's how you identify it. That green tree, green could be calming to me. Blue could be calming to me. Red we often associate with being more energetic. Blue, calming, right? But do I need to think of a calm situation to be able to identify blue? Do I need to think of something exciting to think of red? No, I just know what they look like. And so I think with the perfect pitch training, you have to be careful with that. And that's why I try and say, don't describe them. I'll describe E as bright. Because I think on the piano, to a certain degree, the notes are actually more honest. But if we were to play it on a different instrument, E would definitely have a much more obvious timbre. I'm going to do something before this is over where we're going to use some violin string sounds, and you will hear how much easier it is to identify these notes on the violin because we've been doing all this training. So we've already opened up your ear if you've been following along. And you'll see, but it's not perfect pitch training. It is timbre-specific training, and it is the acoustics of the instrument. It's the way the instrument's actually set up. So what am I saying with all this? So how do you develop perfect pitch then? I think you go back to when you're 2 years old, I mean, honestly, there's some evidence that you have to be 4 to 10 months, and then after that, the window closes. Okay, and you can't learn perfect pitch or languages as well. That's kind of like a formative period where you have to be exposed to a lot of music. That's the idea. But there's some researchers, like there's a Japanese researcher who tested kids from 4 to 7 years of age. And basically, what he did was he played notes and he'd have students guess what those notes were and then he'd correct them. That's all he did. And by the time they were 7 years old, all the students he had been training, all the kids he'd been training, they all had perfect pitch. So obviously, the 4 to 10 month mark is not a strict cutoff. I think it's just easier to be able to develop it naturally. And then I would like to actually do a 20-year study on these kids and see how many of them kept it and what levels of perfect pitch they have. Because you got people with perfect pitch, like Rick Beato's kid, who you can do something like this, and he'll just go straight through from bottom to top. He won't even skip around notes, which is what somebody with perfect pitch would tend to do. They're going to hear an F sharp in there, but they don't know if it's here or here. They just hear an F sharp, so they might put the notes out of order. So, I'd want to know more about what that perfect pitch actually looked like. But I think that if you're going to try and develop this, I do think in this case, you almost have to break your brain a little bit. I think you have to do so much training. And this is why I recommend before you ever even try perfect pitch training, because the the results you'll get from it are so minimal. I don't think they're going to be that great results. I think your time is better spent with relative pitch. But then the other side of that is if you spend all your time on relative pitch training, then it may hamper your ability to hear perfect pitch, to develop perfect pitch. So that's why in my Flawless course, any exercise that I know of that has been researched, that has been demonstrated to develop perfect pitch, it's included in there. So that way you're developing a sort of tone awareness, if not perfect pitch, while developing relative pitch. And I think that is the absolute best way to develop your ear. It's not that I'm teaching you perfect pitch in the relative pitch course, the Flawless course, but I am teaching you perfect pitch drills. And there's over 200 lessons in the whole course. So if you just went one lesson a day, you'd be done in a little less than a year, But there's enough there that if you have the ability to develop perfect pitch, you could actually develop it from the course. Just like a lot of my students at the university did develop perfect pitch. They developed a form of perfect pitch. There were certain notes where they just knew it. It was an instinct. And that is what perfect pitch is. It's an instinct. It's an instinct to know this wall behind me is white. It's an instinct to know that shadows make things a little bit darker, and I can see that. I can see all the colors in the tree behind me, I can see that this shirt is green. I don't have to think about it. So that's what perfect pitch is. And to think that I can just peck out a bunch of notes on the piano and compare them and then develop pitch, I don't know. Maybe you can, but how many hours would you have to spend? How many days, weeks, years? I've proven this. I've come in every single day. This is now day what? 24? It's day 24. So this is my 24th day. I've documented this. This is why I'm doing live streams. I want you to see that I'm coming in every day for 30 days. And I'm trying to develop perfect pitch in those 30 days. And if I have any benefit from that, I want you to be able to see what that benefit is. So you're not wasting your time. I'm wasting my time. Okay? So at the end of this, if I tell you I got this result and this result, or if other people are going along with this, are kind of volunteering their time too, and if they post in the comments, you may be able to ascertain what kind of benefits you could get just from doing these simple exercises. That's kind of the goal here. So what I'm getting at here is I have about 6 days left. Now, what tends to happen in every course I've ever taught or created is it's always at the end where I tie everything together and things start to make sense. I mean, I would have students in my theory courses, they'd be confused and say, that's okay. That's okay. Do this week. Do this today. Have this by this week. And then by the end, I could tie everything together, because you have to introduce so many concepts, you have to get so much information, you have to get a baseline. And once you have that baseline, then I can tie everything in a nice pretty bow and send you on your way and you understand it. That's the idea, right? So that's what we're doing here. But I think at this point, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what I've experienced. So what I've experienced so far, I can tell when I'm in the right mindset, the difference between B flat, C, D, E, and F sharp. I hear a difference. It is not something that I have to think about. I'll sit here and you'll see what looks like concentration. I've got my eyes closed. You probably think I'm going, trying to get in that note, like trying to uncover some secret, but it's actually so subtle. That B flat, it's just there. My eyes open or shut, it doesn't make it any more clear. Why am I shutting my eyes then? I'm shutting my eyes because what I'm doing is, the moment I play it, I'm sending a mental image of it to my inner ear. I'm replaying it in as much detail as I can. I'm not just identifying it. If I was just trying to identify it, B flat, C, D, E, F sharp, I hear the colors immediately. That's not what I'm doing. There's a process. And this is a thing that gets lost with so many different types of training. You will hear somebody explain how to do something. They will say, if you want to learn a perfect fifth, sing a perfect fifth. La 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 la. Okay, I can do that and I can demonstrate it, and then if you go and replicate it, you will get a benefit depending on how you replicate it. If you replicate it by just being like mindlessly singing it, bum, bum, you're just going along with the piano and you're repeating what you hear, or you're just repeating it through rote memory, you've just kind of memorized a song, you're not going to get the same benefit as somebody who is actually creating the sound and previewing it before I play it. So if I go like this, bum, I'm already hearing the next note before I play it. Bum, 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 bum. Now I'm being active about it. So this is the hardest thing about education, is it's not just that I can sit here and demonstrate a technique. I also have to be able to demonstrate how to approach that technique. Okay, and that's why I'm spending some time on this today. So when you're going to the piano, if you're trying to develop this, don't just play a note and then identify it. What I do every time I play a note is I hear it first in my head, and then I play the note. If I'm wrong, I allow myself to be a little shocked or frustrated. That is actually important. You want to be a little bit like, oh, I got it wrong. That's critical, even for regular ear training. You want to have that slight, I got it wrong, that frustration. It actually really helps. So I'm previewing it, bum, and then I play it. And then, in addition to that, after I play it, immediately after, I recreate the sound in my mind. So really, what appears to you at home is I'm playing the B flat, listening to it and trying to hear a color. But what I'm actually doing is I'm taking a guess at the B flat, then I play the B flat, and then I replicate in my mind. So it is predict, hear, reinforce. Every single note I play. And that's why sometimes when I'm just going like this, every single note, it's bum, 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 bum. But the third part of that is that I'm replicating the sound in my mind. So there are three parts to hearing pitches. So you wouldn't know that necessarily unless I explained it. I think I tried to explain this in the beginning, but I'm going to explain it again now, and it'll be part of the quiet ear when I finish those. But I've decided I'm going to get through these daily trainings first, get more context, and then I'll go through and create the weekly quiet ear trainings, which you can actually replace with this, or you can take those and then come in and follow along with me live. All right, so the technique matters. The understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve matters. I mean, you can sit there and you can talk about the colors all day long, but a lot of times we're manufacturing those colors. Like, I'll hear people say, you know, you can hear extra notes in there. So maybe you're hearing overtones. But can you focus in on the actual note that I'm playing? Can you predict it, fix it through reinforcement, and then replicate in your mind? All right, so I think that's all I really wanted to talk about today. Please go enjoy these flawless ear training videos I have for you. Look, they're not necessarily the most exciting things, but the reason I've been able to accomplish a really good ear and really develop and produce all this content is because I work really hard. But I also feel it's very important to make time for family and things like that. So, you know, I play with my child every morning, every night, and during the day, I sometimes see her as well. She comes in here, plays with my keyboards, messes up all my stuff, then she leaves, you know? So you got to have that work-life balance, but you got to work really efficiently. I had an instructor when I was in college. I was just so tired. I was playing in 6 ensembles. I was taking like 12 classes, because if you're a music major, you'll understand this. As an undergraduate, all your classes are like 0, 1, or 2 credits. I said that right, 0 credits, you know, and they're intensive. Like a 0 credit course would be 2 hours of recital attendance every week, you know, or a 1 credit course might be an ensemble where you go to different states sometimes to perform, and you meet daily for rehearsals that are an hour to 2 hours long, and then you have all these performances on top of it, and you have to learn the music. So, you know, it's just, these music programs are intensive. And, you know, he said to me, I almost forgot what I was trying to say, but he said to me, he's like, well, you know, some people sleep like 12 hours a day, but they're still very productive. And it's because they have a very precise plan for what they need to get done, and they're very efficient. So if you're finding yourself with a lack of time, you got to figure out how to make it work for you, you know? Because when I was teaching at the university, I mean, that was a lot of time, but I was still, you have to find time to work on stuff for yourself. And if I hadn't, when I finally didn't have a job there, I would have been in a very bad position, because I would have had nothing to fall back on. I just had this one job, you know? So the way you get out of whatever situation you're in is, I think, work, you know, and trying to just prevent burnout. And I'm really rambling now, so I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it at this today. But now I'm going to be quiet now that you know the process. So predict, listen, replicate in your mind. We're going to do that for a little bit. This is going to be a perfect pitch drill for today on B flat, C, D, E, and F sharp. I'm not going to tell you the notes, because that's part of it too. You want to kind of struggle to figure out what notes you're actually listening to. Okay, so before I played it, I knew I was going to play a B flat. So I'll help you out here. I'm going to play a B flat, C, D, E, and F sharp in that order. I'm going to play them once each. You know what the order is now, so predict. B flat. Now you hear it in your mind. C. Replicate it. D. Replicate it. E. Replicate it. F sharp. Now, if you did it that way, did you notice a difference in perception? There is a difference, I think. B flat. We're going to do this 10 times. I'm not going to say the notes anymore. You know the sequence. Next one, C. Okay, now I'm going to end the stream here, but what I want you to do is for another few minutes, you can count on your fingers, do whatever you want to do, make a check mark, do it 8 more times, this sequence, without the piano. And then if you do have an instrument, check yourself each time you reset on B flat, because you don't want to drift too much. So what you're doing is you're just hearing in your mind now. Bum, 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 bum. Just like that, okay? And that's all you're doing. So that is a lesson for today, and a bunch of other really random stuff. So I'll see you again tomorrow. We still got a few more days of this, and go do some relative pitch ear training or play some music, you know? Have fun. I'll see you next time.